Okay, so if you take a look up at my screen here really quickly, it will look very different than your screen. This is the work layout that I use to do my retouching in. It's one I've used for years. I'm actually going to show you how to build this thing, or to build one of them. The only reason that this becomes an issue is that I'm not suggesting that you have to use my retouching space. It's just the layout of the tools and stuff. I'm not suggesting you have to do it, but I'm going to show you why I do the way I do it. There's advantages to it. You are welcome to use any retouching space that you want to use in your own life. But if you're going to be following along on any of the videos that I record in this class, whatever, this is what your screen is going to, this is what the recordings are going to look like. Now, you can always change this. Well, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I just want to explain why you're looking at this and why my screen looks completely different than yours. The bigger issue that I need to go through with you guys is that we need to make sure that your preferences are set up correctly. So that's what I'd like to do with all of you right now. If you're doing the work on one of these machines, it will remember the preferences as it's for how yours is set up for this machine. If you've got a computer at home, or you've got a laptop or that kind of stuff, whatever, what we can do is we can, once we get the preferences all set up, we can actually save a preference file that you can then keep on a hard drive. That's where I keep mine. And I can load it into any computer anywhere in the world, and I get my setup for my preferences so that you don't have to do this again and again and again. But I want you to do this setup with me because there's concerns and issues that we need to talk about in here that you guys need to be aware of. So, like I say, if you don't have your own computer here, go ahead and do this process with me. We'll save that small little preference file out, and you can use it, take it home, throw it in the right place on your computer at home, and you will be good to go. Are we good on that part? Okay, so to get to preferences, unfortunately, they are scattered a little all over the place in Photoshop, but if you come up, if you're in a Macintosh world, it's up in the Macintosh drop-down. So I'm sorry, the Photoshop drop-down, come down and you will see preferences. There's a fly-up menu and the term general is here, so come over and just hit general and it will open it up. And you can see there's a series of not really tabs, but an index that's sort of like running along the left-hand side, and then the actual place to set preferences up in the, this is in the, so the right-hand side is where the control window is. If you're on a PC, the preferences are actually under the edit menu, I think. Again, I do work on a PC, but not a whole lot. But I think if you're in a Windows world, you go to the edit menu, and I think it's down near the bottom is where you have preferences. So has everybody been able to get the preference dialog box open? So guys, this is another thing, and I sort of alluded to this in the very beginning. It's a time killer for me to actually stop at every point and say, okay, does everybody have this up? Does everybody have this blah, 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 blah? That just, I'm going to assume that you have actually got this window up. And if you don't, again, that's the point where you remember you all stood up and swore that you would stop me if you weren't on the same page. So this would be one of those times. If you do not have this preference window up, stop me and say, Verser, nope, I don't have it, blah, 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 blah. Yes. Okay, so are you doing this on a Mac? On a Windows? So I think this will be good, because then that way, no, for sure. I think it's your edit menu. Yep. It's down there at the bottom. Yep. And yeah, just go to general. And it should, from this point on, it'll be the same, mostly. Okay. First things first. I'm going to show you how I set up my workflow and my setup. I'll explain a couple of things that might be different for you people. Yes? So are you on a Mac or a PC? On a Mac. So go to the word that says Photoshop in the top left-hand corner, and you could just come down to Preferences. And then over to General. You good? Okay. All right, everybody got on this, right? Okay, first things first. At the top part, I'm going to leave it pretty much. I'm just going to show you the things that I would change and explain to you why. So, when I look at this, and I'm going to come down here. So again, I've got the General tab is selected, and I come down here, and the first thing that I do is uncheck that Show the Home Screen. I fucking hate that home screen. If you like it, keep it. I hate it. It looks like a storefront for Adobe products and shit to me. I hate it every time I do it. And it's just like, no, I just want my fucking file. And you've got to like flash all this shit in front of me. No. So I uncheck that. If you like that home screen, if it makes you feel, I don't know, loved, hang on to it. It's okay. Well, it won't matter to me. The next one down, use legacy new document interface. I love this over the way they do new. So new document is when you hit command down just to bring up a blank synthetic document. In the older version, you actually have much more control, in my opinion, than you do on the newer version. The newer version is all about templates and canned sizes and all that kind of stuff. Drives me nuts. So I don't like it. So I check this use legacy new interface, meaning it's the old interface. Check it, try it. If you like it, great. If you want to go back to the old one, that's fine. Again, doesn't matter to me. The next one down, use legacy free transform. You definitely want this checked. When we get into doing compositing, we actually do transforming in perspective in this, and doing that with the newer version of free transform is virtually impossible to do. Every serious compositor that I know has been screaming at Adobe about this, but nonetheless, at least they put in the, use legacy stuff. Beep when done, I do enable that. There are times where you will actually try to run a filter, like a lens blur filter on a 1 GB file. It can take 10 minutes to do it. It would be nice if your computer would wake you up after it's done, or let you go to the bathroom and let you, whatever. So no harm, no foul, right? Export clipboard, uncheck that. It's the worst memory hog in the world. Memory is your enemy. It's the thing that Photoshop uses. This is a perfect segue to have this conversation. Memory, electronic memory, it's the RAM that's in your computer. You can never have enough RAM. Photoshop is a pig when it comes to this stuff because it does everything inside of RAM. So if you take a 1 GB file and you load it up into Photoshop, it takes up a gigabyte of your RAM. But if you make a change in Photoshop and you haven't saved it, you just made a change in Photoshop, that takes up another gigabyte of RAM. Another change, another gigabyte of RAM. So all of this starts to really tax your memory. How many people in this room have a browser open when you're working in Photoshop? All of you do, right? You're listening to music. How many have your email open as well? All of that robs your computer system from memory, and it slows Photoshop down. If you want a killer machine to do your retouching in, you run Photoshop and nothing else. Get your music on your phone. Get your browser on your phone or your pad or whatever, but do not do it on your machine here. It will kill you. I mean, and Photoshop makes it work. It's just slow. And again, give me the hour job, let me do it in 10 minutes, and I've just increased my wage earning power by 6 times. All right? So anyway, uncheck export clipboard. Nobody would export an image out of Photoshop via a clipboard anyway. When was the last time you selected an image file in Photoshop, copied it, and then tried to put it into a Word document? Nobody does this. So the fact that they've got this shit on, it's just absurd. Anyway, uncheck that guy. The rest of it on this part, you can leave it its defaults. Go down to Interface tab now. On the Interface tab here, I pretty much leave it the way it is. However, there are people who struggle seeing with this window setup, the coloring that the window is set up right now. People can have some trouble seeing that part. Sometimes this is how Photoshop goes out natively. It's a little bit darker. So the things at the very top just allow you to change basically what the surrounding containers are, what the palettes and the tools are, what they actually look like. I would strongly discourage you from going to this light gray or the white even. And the problem with this is that they tend to have an impact on your eyes. So when you're doing color correction, this will actually cause your eyes to misperceive the color of your image. What your eyes tend to do is your eyes will look at the brightest thing in an image and color balance that. And if the brightest thing in your image is your interface, then you're not getting the true color that you think you're actually getting. So I would keep it at the almost darkest one or the very darkest one. For me, I do the almost darkest one because we change things in the room to actually make things a little bit darker itself. The rest of this you can actually leave it at its default. Workspace is the next thing that you're going to go to, and this is where I change things. You may or may not like this. For me, especially when I'm doing compositing work, I will have multiple images open in Photoshop. And the default behavior now is that every single one of those is a tab. So you really only see a single image at a time. And then you have a row of tabs of whatever's closed. Does that make sense? Everybody understand what I'm talking about here? That makes it really difficult if you've got 4 or 5 images open, knowing where to take this piece of an image and put it into that particular image. It forces you to remember all of the tab names and which ones they are, because you can drag and drop onto a tab. But I hate that behavior. For me, I want to know exactly the image that I'm going to. It's much faster. So I turn off this open documents as tabs, and I turn off the enable floating document when docking. What the second one is about is that if you have an image in Photoshop and that thing is turned on and you drag the image up close to the very top of your screen, it automatically becomes a tab. I do not like tab behavior, so I turn all of this off. You guys don't have to. If you like it, you love it, stick with what you got. I'm just telling you the way I work and why it works actually for me. The next one down is tools. In the tools, there's a couple of things that we actually need to change in here. Yeah. Oh, so yeah, so wait, your auto show high panel. So what that means is that if you wanted more space in your Photoshop workspace, if you turn that on, for instance, your properties tab over here disappears until you bring your cursor all the way over to that side, and then it leaps out. You can make your change, and then the minute you come off of it, it goes away again. Again, the way I think you'll find the workspace setup, you don't really need that, but if that's something, again, that you guys like, again, these are my suggestion, guys. These are not hardcore rules. So down to the next one, tools. In the tool part, right now what Photoshop has done is that if you hover over a tool, so tools are the, you know, the brush and the healing brush tool and the clone stamp tool. Those are the tools. If you hover over it with the way this is set up with just show tooltips, what this will actually do is it will just tell you what the tool is. So if you hover over like the clone stamp tool, whatever, it'll tell you it's the clone stamp tool. If you have on this show rich tooltips, you get this little drop down, and it's a small little video of how the tool works. I don't want that little video anymore. I don't need the little video. I know how the tool works, so I turn that part actually off. The rest of this is all going to be by default, so nothing else to change there. In the history and content credentials, so history, why on earth would anybody want to do history? So I'm going to throw this. Does anybody in this room have any thought that possibly being a retoucher would be a career that you might want to explore when you first leave Columbia, right? Because if it told you you could make, starting out of the gate, 25, 30 an hour, get it up to 50 an hour, do 2 years of that, land in New York and make 2,000 a day, would that be something that would appeal to anyone? Possibly, right? So here's the trick about history. You will never use history. Now, this history log. Now, this is very different than history in Photoshop. But in the history log, what this is about is if you have to turn it on. So go ahead and click on Turn on History Log, and you will see you can save items either to metadata, to a text file, or both. And what that means is that whatever image that you're working on, it will record what you do to the file. So it's not recording history like the history. You can go back in history when you're actually working on an image in Photoshop. This just says, okay, Verser picked the clone stamp tool, and then Verser picked the healing brush tool, and then, I mean, it's just recording those things, right? What I did. So if you pick metadata, it puts it strictly into the metadata of your file. The metadata in your file is just a text file that describes how you actually worked on the image. If you click on text file, though, you'll actually see it'll actually open up a place and say, okay, I'm going to save this text file. And you would name this text file after the image that you're working on. So you would have a different one of these for every image that you're working on. And there's a reason behind this madness, trust me. So if we were going to do this, I would actually click on Save This as a Text File. I would name this the exact same name as the image that I'm working on. So let's say I'm working on image you know, flowers 987. That's what I would name this text file, and I would say, okay, I'm not going to actually do this, so I'm going to cancel, but you guys get the gist here. You can click both, which will actually make a copy of a text file and also put it into your metadata. I think that's redundant, no reason to do that. And what you actually save, though, is important. So if you click on this drop down, it says sessions only, and what that means is that your text file or your metadata will timestamp every single time you open the your image and every single time you closed it. Who cares? If you went to concise, what concise does is it will pick every major move you make. So Verser grabbed the clone stamp tool, and then it won't record anything else until it says Verser got the healing brush tool, right? It records those things. But the detailed version down here is every single thing that you do in Photoshop. Verser picked the clone stamp tool. Verser stroked once from here to here. Verser stroked a second time from here to here. Verser closed a dot right here. Verser changed the opacity of the brush to 50%. Verser changed the hardness. Every single thing that you do, right? And why would you want that? The reason you want that is that you bid out for a job that you're going to do as a retoucher, and you say, yeah, I'll retouch that image for $2,000, and they say fine, and you bring them the image exactly the way you talked about doing it, and they look at it and they say, well, that was so easy, why am I paying you $2,000 to do this? And you have printed out your detailed history log. I've actually printed one of these out. These things can run 500, 1,000 pages, 1,500 pages. I mean, this thing, so you walk in with this big old giant ass thumb book and you say, that's what I did, give me my fucking $2,000. And they look at it and they go, okay. Because it's staggering. You have no idea. If you've never done this, you should just try it sometime when you're going to have a serious retouching. Build one for yourself just to see. Thousands of pages is what you end up doing. And nobody will argue with you. So anyway, see, that's why you came to this class. It's all that inside skinny. But for us, we're not going to do history log. I just wanted you to know it was there. Next one down, file handling. I leave this all at its defaults, so you don't need to worry about this. However, there is one major change. And if you look on the right-hand side, sort of the top part where it says automatically save recovery entry information in every, by default, that is not checked. You definitely want to enable that, and you want to set it at a 10-minute interval. And what happens is that if your computer crashes, if your computer locks up, if your computer runs out of power, no matter what it does, you cannot lose more than 10 minutes of your work. There's a file system the whole time behind the scenes that is keeping a current version of your file, and it rewrites it every 10 minutes. You don't have to do anything. You don't see it. But if your computer crashes or if it locks up and you have to force quit Photoshop, when you start Photoshop up again, your file will open up automatically again with a tag called recovered in it. And again, the worst you can lose is 10 minutes worth of your work. That's worth the price of showing up here today, isn't it? Yeah. Why wouldn't they have that on by default? And why is it buried so deep? Anyway. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, the rest of it by default. Export, I don't change this a lot. I'm okay with exporting. It's just basically what quick export would be. As a PNG, PNG, the nice thing about PNGs over JPEGs is that they actually allow for transparency. So I'm fine with that. I'm going to leave the rest of this pretty much as it is. In your quick export part, though, you should actually have this convert to sRGB. If it's not selected, you should go ahead and select it that way. We will talk about color spaces later on, but suffice it to say this, that anything that you're going to do online for the web, whatever, should be in an sRGB color space. And so most of the time, our working files, the files that we work on in Photoshop, will not be in sRGB, not ever. But when you then go to export them out, or you go to send them for some other different reason, whatever, sRGB is probably the preferred working space if people are going to be looking at it electronically. So that's what I would do right there. Performance. So this has to do with how much RAM you've really got in your computer. The default for Photoshop is that it always sets it to 70%, and it'll tell you how much RAM you've got up here in the top. You can see in mine, I've got, actually I've got 16 gigabytes of RAM in here. Not all of that RAM is available to me. The computer itself, the Finder, everything itself needs some RAM. You don't want to crank this up to like 90%, anything like that. But if you're working on, most laptops don't have this, but if you've got a gaming laptop, you may have this. If you've got a desktop that's got 32, 64 gigabytes of RAM, something that's got really a ton of RAM, your overhead is the same. It doesn't, the overhead that the Finder needs and that your browser might need or whatever, that doesn't really change a lot. So this number will change considerably. So you could consider bumping that part up if you've got a machine that's got a lot of RAM. If you don't, I'm going to say just basically leave it at its setup right here, the way it's set up to 70%. This little thing on to the right-hand side, use graphic processor, should be enabled. However, when stuff starts happening in your Photoshop that gets really glitchy, there is a chance that it's this problem right here. Graphic processors are taking over a lot of what happens in Photoshop now. And again, I don't know how advanced you guys are in the kind of work you're doing, but Liquify over the last year has had enormous problems with, you'll actually go in and liquefy something and you end up, once the result comes out of the liquefy space, you have holes in your image, completely blank holes. And it's because of this graphics processor, and the solution short term before Adobe can fix it is to come in here and turn this off. So if you've got some really weird shit that's starting to happen, email me, text me, whatever. This would be the place that I would send you to turn this off. We are going to leave history and cache, the rest at their defaults. Image processing, this is a newer thing. I'm going to leave it at its default. Scratch disks. What the hell is a scratch disk? Does anybody know? How many people have gotten scratch disk is full, we can't save your image? Oh, raise your hand high and be proud. We've all had that, and if you haven't had it happen to you, you haven't worked with big enough files yet. All right. You're not going to see this on the screen. You will hear it on the recording. But scratch disking is critical for us. And so I'm going to show you. I feel always guilty about erasing this. Somebody took a long time to get this up here. I guess I don't feel that bad about it. My writing is so horrible. There's no way I would try to do this to you guys. Oh, no. It's just you probably, this is not the latest version of Photoshop. You're probably behind, but no. Okay, so this is really quick how Photoshop works 101. So I have a computer here. That's my computer. Looks more like a pizza oven. Now you know why I'm a photographer and not an illustrator. Wait, when you see my writing, you'll know why I'm not a calligrapher. It looks like a what? Okay. Anyway, this is a hard drive right here. And I'm going to say this is a terabyte hard drive, just because I can. So in this computer, you have RAM. So we were just looking at it earlier. RAM is electronic memory. It's a place that you can actually put data into and then change the data, and that's what Photoshop is all about. But it all happens in RAM. So I'm going to say that this computer has 4 gigabytes of RAM, just to make this a fast illustration. So it's got 4. This is 1 gigabyte. 2. This is 2 gigabytes. So the second is also 1 gigabyte. 3 and 4. Okay, 1 gigabyte. Does that make sense what this is? So this is my RAM. So I've got a 1 gigabyte file right here. So this is my 1 gigabyte file. And it's the image that I'm working on. And I want to keep working on it. So in order to do something in Photoshop, the file can't just be on the hard drive. It can't go in there. I've got to load it into the program, into Photoshop, so that I can a curve or blur something or do paint on it or do whatever I'm going to do, right? So what happens is that when you double click on your file, it loads it, it reads the data off of your hard drive into this first gigabyte of RAM, and then I can do changes to it because it's now electronic. The whole thing Photoshop does is it just goes in and it changes the numbers in here. That's all it does. Make sense? It's really the simple thing in the world. It's really hard to build a system to do that, but the idea behind it is very simple. So that's great. However, I want to make a change. So I'm going to add a layer or duplicate a layer. What happens is Photoshop these gigabyte things on the side. So you guys remember these are RAMs. This has got state number 1 in it right now. When I loaded it in, what happens is when I make the change, Photoshop makes the change and it writes the second version of my file here. And the reason it does that is that gives me undo. If I decide I don't like it and I want to go back, all Photoshop does is it says, well, he doesn't like this, he wants this version. This version is still sitting in the RAM, so it's immediate. I go right back to it. It's no problem at all. So you have progressive undos. We've actually set by default 50 states of undo. However, we don't have 50 slots of RAM to do that, so this is what happens. I make another change. I'm going to add a color curve on top of it. Photoshop sees that as the third version, and it's in the third slot of RAM, and then I make another change to it. I go in and I add another layer and do some cloning work on it. And I get a fourth layer. Typically at this stage of the game I would have to quit. I've only got 4 shots here. I've got 50 states of undo. So Photoshop does a trick, and what it does is this. It says, okay, he's actually exceeded the amount of RAM. So we're going to take our number 1 state, and we're going to write it back into the hard disk. So this becomes the number 1 state here. It's got nothing to do with the original file. It's just the number 1 state. And then it can put the 5th state in RAM, but I can still go back to my number 1 state if I have to. The problem that I have is that this is all electronic memory. The pathway back and forth between here is not, especially if you have an external hard drive or you have just a mechanical hard drive. This is incredibly slow, this back and forth. It gets worse. I'm going to make another change. Now my 6th state, so this becomes 6. Number 2 gets written back here. Now my 2 state is on my hard drive. And this process keeps happening over and over and over again. And what happens is you cannot see these files on your hard drive, but they're taking up space. They're in what they call, it's an invisible partition, and it is called a scratch disk. And so when you run out of space, what happens is you've done this thing so many times, you run out of room on your hard drive. Even though you don't know these files exist, there's no way you can really see that the scratch disk is eating up all that space. But when that happens, when the scratch disk is full, you don't have room to save your file, and you're fucked. You can't save the file, you can't go back, you can't undo it. All of that work, your only option at that point is to simply quit Photoshop and lose all of your work and start it up again and do it all again. So scratch disks become really important. Does this whole process make sense to you guys? So, how do you avoid this problem? First and most important thing, and I'm apologizing, I don't know how to do this on Windows. I am going to show you how to do it on a Mac, and if your Windows people can't Google this really quick, you don't need to do it right this second, but you need to find out how much available hard disk space you have on your computer. So for everyone else, I need you to go up to the Apple menu, come down to About This Mac, and down to, actually there's an easier way to do it. There's an easier way to do it. Let's just go to your Finder. I'm going to hide everybody else. Click on your Macintosh hard drive. The thing's called Macintosh HD. and then hit Command I, or go to the File menu and come down and hit Get Info. And when you do that, a screen will open up and it will show you the capacity of your hard drive and how much is available space that you've actually got. So if you look up at my screen here right now, you can see I've got a 1 terabyte hard drive and I've got 216 free gigabytes on that. The rule of thumb for avoiding trouble is a minimum of 10% free space on your computer. So for all of you guys right now who are looking at your 250 gigabyte hard drive on your laptop and you see that you have less than 25 gigabytes, that would be 10%, you are flirting with danger. Is anybody, no, I can't ask that. Is this resonating with anybody in here? Because it happens to all of us, right? That's kind of the rule of thumb here. The other rule of thumb for scratch disking is if you've got at least 60 gigabytes, you should be in good shape. So my rule of thumb for this should be, and you should write this down, 10% of your hard drive free plus 60 gigabytes. That's what you need. And if you don't have that, you need to start getting shit off of your computer onto external hard drives, because you are crippling yourself and you are running the risk of having scratch disk full message and then not being able to save your file and wasting tons of your work. And believe me, all those videos that you have, because videos are the things that really kill people, they're not worth keeping. Nobody wants to see all your videos all at the same time anyway. Make sense? In terms of what you're seeing on there, not necessarily. It won't really reflect the invisible partition that the scratch disk is creating. So there are solutions to this that go beyond that. Is my hard drive around, the little hard drive for right here? I'm going to show you how you can alleviate this if you have an external hard drive. So I'm going to take this external hard drive and I'm going to plug it in. Ignore, it looks like I've got 3 hard drives on here. I really only got 1 that's partitioned, but that's why these are all the same. And let me go back and come back to this. Sorry, hang on one sec. So, if you take a look at my list right now, the thing that I just added was called Verser's external 1 terabyte TB. You can use an external hard drive as a scratch disk as protection for this. So to do it, you actually have to click on it to enable it to make sure it's happening. If you want it to be the primary scratch disk, you actually have to click to move it to the top of the stack. And what happens now is that it will use my external hard drive until I run out of space there, and then it'll actually go to my internal hard drive, the Macintosh HD, and start working on it there. And then if I run out of space there, it'll continue to run on down the line. So you can do that. It's a pain in the ass though, because it means you always have to have your external scratch disk available and using it. Nobody wants to do that. So just go back to the rule that I was just telling you about. 10% of your hard drive space plus 60 gigabytes and you'll be fine. Make sense? If you do get into this though, the one last thing you need to know about this is that this requires a restart of Photoshop for this to take effect. So if I just said okay right now, this would not be happening. Are we good? Okay. Let me get rid of that part first. Okay. Almost there, guys. Cursors. This is a critical one for us. It's the next one down. In terms of the cursors that you want to use a normal brush tip, not a full-size brush tip. The reason you don't want to use a full-size brush tip is that if you use a very soft brush, as it starts to actually fade out to the very edges, you don't expect the very edge of where the brush is going from being essentially a brush to nothing. You don't want that to appear as your full brush size. You want the normal brush size. It'll appear much more like the way that you actually work. So normal brush tip is what you expect. A full brush tip would completely throw you. So keep it as a normal brush tip. Also, you want to check that crosshair in the tip. It'll put a little crosshair which will give you the midpoint of your brush. That becomes critical for us when we're doing really exact work in terms of placing something. In terms of the other cursors, you want to set this to precise, not standard. Nobody works with a paintbrush that looks like a fucking paintbrush. Nobody does fill with a little bucket that looks like it's pouring water out. Nobody uses little eyeglasses or nobody uses any of that shit. Now, if you love those things, keep them. The problem is that they're really inexact. If you use the precise version and you actually use the eyedropper tool, instead of having an eyedropper icon where you've got to click right on the very point of that little eyedropper end of it that would be sucking up the ink or whatever it is, you've got a crosshair. You know exactly what you're hitting. So it's just more precise. Next one down, transparency and gamut. The biggest problem here is that the gamut warning by default is a middle gray. If you put that onto an image, you cannot see it on an image. What this is showing you is you're out of gamut warning. Those are colors that cannot be reproduced on specific devices. So you can have a color that you can see on your monitor that your printer can't print. You can actually check to see what those colors are, and you do it by using this gamut warning. But if you put a black and white or a gray on a black and white image, you will never see that gray on there to begin with. It's really hard to see on a color image. So we changed the color for it. If you double click on that, it'll bring open a color picker. And the easiest way I get to a pure green is that once you get your color picker open, you will see that you've got 4 ways of describing color, 4 sets of values here. The first one is the 3 at the top, HSB, stands for hue, saturation, brightness. The second one, RGB, stands for red, green, and blue. The third one on the other side is LAB, stands for L would be the lightness of your image. A and B are color axes in a color space. So the A value actually represents green to magenta, and the B value represents blue to yellow. And then finally, you've got CMYK values on the bottom right-hand side. The easiest way to work with these, especially the RGB part, is, I don't care what color you've got selected up there, simply double-click on the R value. I just double-clicked on it. You'll see it says, in my case, it says 0. I don't care what yours says, but type in 0. Then to move to the green key, just hit your tab key. It will take you down really quick. Type in 255. Hit the tab key and you will go to your blue and type in 0. That gives you a pure green. 0 red, 0 blue, and as massive amount of green as you can get. And it's a very neon fluorescent green. And so when you use it as a warning on your image, you can spot it a mile away and say okay to that. And everybody else we're good for until you get down to technology previews down at the bottom. And in technology previews, what do you guys have? Do you have anything that's checked? The same as what I've actually got right here. Then you can leave this as it is right now and just hit OK. So that's the first part of it. And you would think, okay, well, we've set all the preferences. That would not be true. We have not set all the preferences. And this may be different on Windows as well, but we'll come look on this. The next place I need you to go for the Macintosh people is your Edit menu, and come down to Color Settings. Was it in the same thing as Preferences, or was it just underneath? Yeah, I mean, I think the way Windows does it is so much smarter. They got it all in one place. Macintosh people, they put shit everywhere. This is one of the biggest problems that people have in this, and it's Adobe's fault in large measure. So if you take a look at the way this screen is set up, at the very top you've got presets, working spaces, color management policies, and by default, if you've never gone in here and changed this stuff, all the color management warnings and policies are turned off. And the reason that becomes a problem is that if you say you've got your beautiful file that's in an Adobe RGB color space and it's a really big color space and it's great, and then you put it onto a machine and open it up and all these warnings are turned off and that machine is set to sRGB, it will convert your file to sRGB. It will not tell you that it did that. And then when you save your file, it's baked in sRGB. And your only way to do that is to go find the file again before you actually brought it in. This is like giving a baby a loaded gun. No, this is how, so if you change the settings up at the very top to North American General Purpose 2, this is how Adobe ships it. So sRGB is the color space, which is wrong, but all the profile mismatching is all turned off. It's horrible. So what I want you to do is change that. And again, typical UI for Adobe. They couldn't find a name different, North American General Purpose 2 or North American Prepress 2. How closer could you get? You know, it's not like they call one, oh, this is the right one, and the other one, I don't know, anyway. I rant about Adobe all the time. But the reason you want to do that is that you'll now see that Adobe RGB is the preferred color space. All of your profile mismatch warnings are turned on, and now that problem will not happen, because now if you were to actually open a file that was in your beautiful Adobe RGB and somebody had set their color space to their working space to sRGB, this warning comes up and says, the file that you're trying to bring in here, do you want to leave it alone and manage it that way, or do you want to convert it into that smaller space? Make sense? So this one's really critical. If you work on multiple machines or on, like, bring in and do something on this machine right here, your first job is to check this out, because people fuck with this stuff and it's sticky. Yeah, man.
Why did you make the setting before somewhere else on sRGB?
I'm sorry, what?
You made somewhere else.
That would be, it was in the export dialog box, which is where you do want it. So if you are just going to kick out a quick PNG that you want to put on your Instagram page,
Yeah.
you want it to be in sRGB.
Okay.
sRGB is the color space of the web, but it's not the space that we work in here because it's too small. We'll get into what color spaces really are. All right, are there questions about this part? Okay, so go ahead and say the rest of this you can leave it up as it is. Go ahead and say okay to that. We're almost done. So edit menu down now to toolbar. In the toolbar down right here, you can actually change up your toolbar, what is actually shows up over here. And the reason that I just wanted to show this to you is that in the toolbar over here, if all of a sudden you expect something and you're missing it, it's because this allows you to arrange it and to move stuff in and out. So for instance, I'll show you, take a look at my screen here really quickly. I'm going to do my drop down. These are the lasso tools that I've got over here. I've got a lasso tool, a polygonal tool, and the magnetic lasso tool. I'm going to go up to that toolbar setup again, and I'm going to grab the polygonal lasso tool and I'm going to pull it off and say done. And now you'll notice that I don't have it there any longer. I've only got the lasso tool and the magnetic lasso tool. If I want it back, I go to toolbar and I grab the polygonal lasso tool and I drag it back into order with the other guys, and I'm good to go. And the reason I point this out is that for me, there's a bug that's happening in Photoshop right now, and it's been getting rid of tools of mine that I use. So I use the, I don't even know what they call it, the magic brush tool. I think it's what it's called. Whatever. It disappears half the time on me, and I just simply go back in here and set it up. Are we good on this part? Almost done. Last one, come down to menus. And when this opens up, you need to click on the keyboard shortcuts. And now for me, this is personal to me, and it's up to you how you guys work. In the entire history of Photoshop until last year, if you did something, so let's say I did a brush stroke, and I hit Command Z, it would undo the brush stroke. If I hit Command Z again, it redoes the brush stroke, and it just goes back and forth for those two states, endlessly back and forth. If you want to go progressively further back, you have to hit the Command Option key, and then you can go back all the way to the beginning of your file. They changed that about a year ago. And now if you hit Command Z alone, you will forever go back into history. But if you hit Command Option Z, it'll just flip back and forth between those two states. Whatever way you like it. But for me, I've grown up for 20 years. I've been using Command Z to actually go back and forth because it's a great way to preview. And when they changed the keyboard shortcut, it was just like, you got to be kidding me. So anyway, this is where you change it. Are there any questions about this? We good? All right, hang on one second. Almost there, but not completely there. If it works. So you can go ahead and say OK to this. Come back up to Photoshop. And again, for the Windows people, I think this is going to be in your Edit menu preferences. Come down to Preferences, and down at the very bottom, you should have Camera Raw as a preference. I need you guys to open this up. You used to have to be able to actually go into Camera Raw to set this up, but this is kind of an important one for us. So, does everybody get here? Again, Photoshop, Preferences, down at the very bottom, Camera Raw. That doesn't look good. Oh my God. Oh, all right. So anyway, under General, of course, they would give you another Use Legacy Undo Shortcuts down at the bottom, because one of them isn't enough. Anyway, I would check that. In terms of file handling, you can actually leave this exactly the way it is right now. Under Performance, again, this is where your graphics processor, it's set to auto here, which means it's probably referring to, yeah. Then you guys may have an older version of Photoshop. Just updated that, so what's the difference now? Oh, wait, yeah, actually, hang on, I don't think, sorry. Did I blow right by that? Oh, yeah, I did blow right by that. Sorry. This is an important one. Go back to file handling. So in the area of the drop-down here where it says JPEG, HEIC, and TIFF, there is a drop-down menu that allows you to get Camera Raw support for JPEGs, for HEIC, which is Apple's newest, essentially compressed JPEG, so this allows you to control. Basically what it means is that if you double click on a JPEG, instead of bringing it straight into Photoshop, it will go into Camera Raw, which will allow you to actually use all the Camera Raw controls on it. Nobody really does that anymore because they put a Camera Raw filter inside of Photoshop, which does the exact same thing. So you can, for the most part, disable all of this unless you know that that's something you really care about doing, and I would do the same thing for TIFFs. Because JPEGs and TIFFs are already baked files. There's no advantage of doing those corrections in Camera Raw. You don't get the bang that you get using a RAW file in Camera Raw, and you can just use the Camera Raw filter inside of Photoshop, and it'll give you all the same controls. So disable both of those. RAW defaults, this one does matter to us. They've changed how this part works. But for the most part, by default, this is not turned on in Photoshop in Camera Raw. By default, you do not get lens correction or chromatic aberration correction inside of Photoshop, inside of Camera Raw. I'll show you what that looks like. Those are two things that you definitely want to be on by default. In the old days, you would actually open up Camera Raw, you would enable both of those and resave those as a new default. In the current version of Photoshop now, you don't do that. What you do is come up and click on this drop-down menu, and you will actually see under Choose Preset, you can come all the way down under Optics, and you are looking for a check by the lens plus CA, which stands for chromatic aberration correction. You want to pick that preset. And then now every time you open up a file in Camera Raw, it will correct for your lenses. So if your lens is vignette, it will take care of the vignetting. If they have barrel distortion or pin cushioning, it will eliminate that part. And chromatic aberration, which I will show you what that is in just a little bit. But does this make sense? Did everybody be able to find, was everybody able to find that part? That's what you want to be your normal. Okay. And then finally, workflow. In the workflow, you can actually set your color space. If you click on the drop down, you can see you can set it to a ton of different color spaces. It is my suggestion in doing the workflow I'm going to show you in this class that Adobe RGB is the perfect space for you to actually be working in. How many people in this room are using something other than Adobe RGB? Is anybody using ProPhoto RGB? So when you guys bring a file in from Lightroom into Photoshop, it comes in as RGB or it comes in as ProPhoto? You should check. Anyway, here's the whole, basically the skinny on this. Adobe RGB is smaller than ProPhoto. ProPhoto RGB is gigantic color space. How many colors can be really contained in it? The problem that we run into is that there is not a monitor made in the world that gets much bigger than Adobe RGB. So if you are working in ProPhoto RGB, it's an enormous space, but you can actually push color out to a point where you can't see it. You don't see any difference in it on your monitor because your monitor can't show that to you. Now, there are people who promise you that there are going to be ProPhoto RGB monitors somewhere in the future, and you know, if you believe that, I have got a bridge you might be interested in. I just turned 32. What are the great lies in life? Checks in the mail's number one. And I won't tell you the rest. I'm recording this. Anyway, my suggestion is that you use Adobe RGB. Next to it, which is equally important, is 8 bits per channel. Now, if you for some reason know that you want to use ProPhoto, you've got to use 16 bits per channel. The space is so large, you need that amount of information to describe the space. So it will double the size of your file. And it will also, that means that a file that's double in size means anything that you do to it is going to take twice as long. So Adobe RGB and 8-bit is the best compromise of them all. So I'm going to leave it at that. You do not want to ever check image resizing. This is all about raw files. You're never going to reset these here. So leave this unchecked. Resolution does not matter at all. You're not changing the number of pixels. You're merely saying, how big is the pixel? That doesn't matter. You can change that after the fact. You would never sharpen in a raw file situation like this for output. Because how many of you guys, you do a file, you might print it, you might put it on your website, you might put it on your Instagram account, you repurpose your images for all sorts of things. This is saying, okay, well, I know what, I'm going to do one sharpening for all of those things. You would never do that. So that stays off. And then the last one here, I turn on the open in Photoshop as a smart object. Now, how many people in this room know what smart objects are? Go ahead, be proud, raise your hand up high. How many are sort of, I've heard of it, but I'm a little unsure, don't really know exactly. Okay, I will tell you this right now. This class is a smart object workflow class. There are so many advantages to being able to work with smart objects. It's just ridiculous. So for me, it's my go-to. So you can always do this after the fact when you actually got a file. You can always say, change it when you're getting ready to bring it into Photoshop. I want it to be a smart object, but I just turn this on by default. It doesn't mean you can't go back and forth between you two. It just saves me another step. Yes?
Can you go back to the raw defaults? Let's say I have like a fisheye lens. And
Yes.
it has you get rid of that circle around it then? Like,
It's not going to get rid of the circle. What it does is...
or crop it in so that...
No. What it does is this. Wide-angle lenses are notorious in vignetting. So basically the edges are always darker because there's such an extreme distance that they're bringing stuff into your sensor than what's coming straight through the very middle. So what Adobe does is that they buy those lenses and they test that fall off. What's the vignette? Does it fall off a third of a stop or a half a stop or 3/4 stop? What is the fall off? And how does it gradate? So as we start to move into the center, we've got to adjust it. You can't just say, well, at one point I'm going to add a third of a stop to make it fix it. It's got to be all graded. Anyway, they build a profile that corrects for that. Then also, and I'll show you pin cushioning and barrel distortion. Lenses, all lenses do this. Lenses have a way of the center actually, and sometimes it's hard to see, especially in a lens that'll distort like a fisheye, that the center seems to be protruding more out of the frame than everything else in the image, or that's called barrel distortion. Pin cushioning is the exact opposite. It seems like everything is being pushed in. So it will also correct for that. So what it's doing is that it's correcting for not the distortion, the design of the lens. It's correcting for the actual manufacture of the lens.
Okay.
So it's not going to fix those things, because I know exactly what you're talking about. It does not fix that stuff.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to say okay to that. Are there questions about this? Oh, excellent call. So this is where you find it. If you go to our website, so please do, just so that you can find this stuff. And in our website, under the Session 1 resources, so again, I'm going to go to my modules page. I'm going to go down to Session 1 under the resources. And under the resources, there is a resource that says Photoshop Preference Locations. And if you click on that link, it will take you to where they are. This is for both OS and for Windows. If you scroll down to the very top here, this is the file name that you're looking for. It's called Adobe Photoshop. And then again, it'll have a version number in there, preference.psp. If you're a Windows person, go all the way down. You'll find the exact same file down here in, those are presets, window locations. And again, it's going to be right up here at the very top. This is the path that you follow to Windows. So I'm going to do the Macintosh one because it's a little trickier than the Windows one. So in the Macintosh one, it says that you need to go to the user library, the preference folder, Adobe Photoshop, the version of it, and then into settings. That's where it's going to be located. So here's a trick. Everybody who's on Mac, you need to watch this, because if you haven't done this to begin with, you won't have access to this. In the Mac version of this, I'm going to go to the Finder. If you come up to your Go menu and you simply click on it, you do not see library anywhere up here. Depending on your version of Mac, you hold down either the Shift key or the Option key. In my case, it is the Option key, and that gives me the home library. This is for me. This is my library right here, not the one for the computer, but mine. So again, I'm going to hold down the Option key. I'm going to click on Library. It'll open up a window. This is now the user library. It is hidden by default. Macintosh does not want any of us in here, so they hide this thing. However, that's a pain in the ass to remember that all the time. So a trick to this is, if you look at the library that's at the very top, if you hover over it, you will get a little icon of a folder. Grab that folder and drag it over into your favorites on the left-hand side and let go. And that will be your library from now on. So if you want to get to your library, you simply click on that and you're good to go. So then we need to follow this path to find that file. So the path says go to the user library, scroll down in that library, or however you guys have, you've got your setup, to the preferences folder. Not preference panes, but preferences. Once you get there, you are looking for the version of Photoshop that you are using. So I'm going to scroll down to mine. Mine is the Adobe Photoshop 2022 settings. Click on that, and inside that, you are looking for the file that says Adobe Photoshop 2020 prefs.psp. It's this file right here. Take that file and drag. So I'm going to drag mine to my desktop, but the thing is, we need to make a copy of this. So I'm going to drag this to my desktop. Come on. To my desktop, but this, if I just do this, it's going to remove it from from Photoshop, and I don't want to do that. I want to make a copy of it. So I'm simply going to hold down the Option key, and you will see you get a little plus sign, and now it will make a copy of this wherever you put it. So I just put a copy of that in my downloads folder, my document folder, whatever. So if you want this now to work on another machine, you simply take that file, go to this very same place, and put your file in, and it will, all of your preferences will be set. And if you keep this file now, if something goes wrong with your computer, again, you simply go here and you are good to go. Yes?
Yeah, so mine doesn't have like Adobe. So I have it here, like
Let me see really quick. Huh. So, I'm going to change this off. I'll see you guys really quick. Okay, so you have preferences. That is your primary settings. Let's check something else on that. It's saving stuff in year 2019. You're not working in the latest. This is not using the latest version of Photoshop. This is using 2019 settings. Because that. Guys, we're going to take a break really quick anyway, so let's do this. It's, let's call this 3:35. If you can be back in another 10 minutes, 3:45, that'd be great. Let's see, so you are in 2022. Good. I'm going to check on this. They may have locked us out of this. They may have got this where you can't rewrite a preference file to this. Huh. That's okay though, because I can give you mine. Right? So guys, I think what's happening here, I can't swear this for sure, because it seems like, did anybody who was working on one of the Big Macs, were you able to find that file? I think these machines are locked down. I don't think any of the changes that we make will stick. So what I'll do is I will do, right now, I'm going to do an announcement. I'm going to attach my preference file. It's the same. It'll work for any of you guys. It doesn't have my name on it, right? So I'll just do that, and then at least you'll have it, and you can use it. What are you going to say? Okay. All right.
I'm not getting emails for the Canvas page
Okay.
either.
Send me an email and tell me that.
Okay.
I should remind me to announce it to everybody.
Okay.
Okay, so I need anybody who's having trouble with, I need a list, and then we should be good to go.